a harsh Christmas wind swept across the snow-covered plains, throwing ice fragments against the fragile walls of Corbin's isolated cabin. He was a gunslinger who had witnessed too much, a man who sought solitude in the unforgiving embrace of the frontier. The snowstorm had raged for 2 days, a furious white tempest that buried the world and any specters that dared to pursue him. He was consuming the last of his whiskey by the fireplace, the flickering flames his sole companion, when a sound, faint and sharp, pierced through the strong wind. It was not the howl of a coyote or the creak of stressed timber, it was human. Corbin seized his revolver and a lantern, pulling his heavy coat tightly around him. He pushed open the snow-encrusted door, his face stinging as he leaned into the swirling chaos. The world was an indistinct blur of white and gray. He was about to retreat when he heard it again, a desperate cry, almost silenced by the storm. He trudged forward, boots sinking deeply, lantern held high. There, huddled in a snowdrift against his woodpile, were 3 small figures. They were Chinese girls, triplets by their appearance, no older than 7. Their clothing was thin, their faces blue from the cold, their dark eyes wide with fear. They were barely alive. Without hesitation, Corbin gathered them up. They were lighter than sacks of flour, their bodies shaking violently against his chest. He stumbled back to the cabin, the precious burden in his arms, struggling for each step in the knee-deep snow. Inside, he gently placed the shivering girls on his cot and stoked the fire until it blazed. He removed their frozen clothes and wrapped them in his own worn blankets, his movements awkward but urgent. The sudden warmth caused them to cry out, a sign they still possessed the strength to endure. Corbin knelt beside them, his rough voice softer than he had heard it in years. "You are safe now," he whispered. "You are safe." By morning, the snowstorm had diminished to a continuous snowfall. Corbin had spent the night caring for the girls, feeding them a weak broth he had prepared from dried jerky. He was not a man accustomed to looking after anyone but himself, yet an unfamiliar, fierce protectiveness had taken root. Their names, he learned through gestures and softly spoken words, were Lin, Mai, and Sue. They were resilient, and soon, their cheeks regained a touch of color. But his limited supplies would not last, and they required proper food and warmer clothing. The nearest town, Redemption Gulch, was a difficult 5-mile journey away, a place Corbin usually avoided. It was a town that clung to its biases as tightly as it clung to its gold claims. Leaving the girls huddled by the fire with a strict but gentle warning to remain indoors, Corbin saddled his horse and began the arduous journey. Redemption Gulch was a cluster of wooden structures huddled under a thick blanket of snow. He pushed through the door of the general store, the bell chiming above. Martha, the sturdy, kind-faced owner, looked up in surprise. Corbin did not expect to see anyone brave this storm. "I need provisions, Martha," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For children. Milk, flour, warm clothes." Martha's eyebrows rose as he presented the list. Before she could inquire, the door swung open again, allowing in a gust of freezing air and the town's most influential rancher, Silas Thorne. Thorne was a man whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance and his deep-seated animosity towards the Chinese laborers who worked the railroad lines to the north. "Heard you had guests, Corbin," Thorne sneered, his eyes like shards of ice. A couple of his hired hands flanked him, their hands resting near their holsters. "Some people saw smoke from your chimney and tracks. Said you were sheltering strays." "They are children, Thorne," Corbin said, his voice dangerously calm. "Found them in the storm." "Chinese children," Thorne spat. "The same kind whose fathers and brothers have been stealing my cattle. They are nothing but thieves and vagrants." "They were freezing to death," Corbin retorted, his hand dropping instinctively to the worn grip of his own revolver. "That is all that matters." "You are a fool," Thorne growled. "You are inviting trouble. My men and I are forming a posse. We are heading to their railroad camp to get answers, and if we discover any of my cattle, there will be consequences." "It would be wise for you to hand over those girls," Corbin stated, his gaze steady. "That is not going to happen." A tense quiet filled the store, broken only by the crackling sound of the wood stove. Martha, appearing frightened, quickly gathered Corbin's supplies. Thorne stared at him for a prolonged moment before turning and storming out, his men following him. "Be careful, Corbin," Martha whispered, handing him the bag of goods. "Thorne has been seeking an excuse to drive those workers off that land for months." "He is a dangerous man," Corbin nodded grimly, paid for the supplies, and returned to his cabin, a cold sense of dread settling in his stomach. Over the next few days, he reinforced his small homestead as best he could, boarding up a weak section in the wall and ensuring his rifle and revolver were clean and loaded. He spent his time with the girls, a strange domestic atmosphere settling over the cabin. He taught them how to stack firewood and check his snares. They, in turn, began to smile, their laughter filling the small space and gradually melting the ice around his heart. They drew pictures in the frost on the windowpane and chatted in a language he did not understand, yet he found himself listening intently. He was no longer merely a gunslinger hiding from his past, he was a protector. One afternoon, as he was chopping wood, he saw them on the horizon, a dozen riders, dark figures against the vast expanse of white. It was Thorne and his group. Corbin quickly ushered the girls inside, barricading the door. "Stay down and stay quiet," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. He moved to the window, rifle in hand, and watched as they reined in their horses, surrounding the cabin. "Corbin!" Thorne's voice boomed across the clearing. "We know you are inside. We tracked a small group of their kind not 5 miles from here. They scattered, but we know they are nearby. Send out the girls. They can tell us where the rest of their thieving families are hiding." Corbin remained silent, his knuckles white on the stock of his rifle. He could see the fear in the girls' eyes as they huddled together on the floor. He would not let them be taken. He was prepared to make his stand, however hopeless it seemed. The standoff continued, the silence broken only by the whistling wind and the nervous shifting of horses. Thorne was becoming impatient. "Last chance, Corbin. We are coming in." Just as Thorne's men began to dismount, another sound carried on the wind, the thunder of hooves, but this was a sound of a different magnitude. Over the ridge to the north, a wave of riders appeared. They were not ranchers or cowboys. There were at least 100 of them, moving with a silent, disciplined purpose. At their head rode a man with a commanding presence, his face etched with worry and determination. Thorne and his posse froze, their bravado disappearing as they were suddenly, massively, outnumbered. The riders fanned out, forming a silent, imposing crescent behind Corbin's cabin. The leader dismounted and walked forward, his eyes fixed on the small log building. He stopped a few yards away, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. Corbin slowly unbarred the door and stepped out, keeping his rifle held loosely at his side. The man spoke in clear, accented English. "I am Mr. Chen. I am looking for my daughter's." Relief, swift and overwhelming, washed over Corbin. He nodded towards the cabin. The 3 girls, hearing the man's voice, peeked out from behind the door. A cry escaped Mr. Chen's lips as he saw them. "Lin! Mai! Sue!" The girls ran out, and their father dropped to his knees, embracing them, his composure breaking as he cried with happiness. His men watched, their stern faces softening with emotion. Thorne, recovering from his surprise, urged his horse forward. "This proves it. They are all involved together. They have been planning a raid." Corbin stepped between them, his voice resonating with authority. "They are here for their children, Thorne. The children I found half dead in a snowstorm that you were too comfortable to be out in. Their work camp was attacked by bandits, not your men. They were separated in the chaos." "Lies!" Thorne growled, but his accusation lacked conviction. His group was already retreating, unsettled by the silent army of Chinese workers. Mr. Chen stood up, his daughters clinging to him. He looked at Thorne, his expression now one of cold anger. "We are railroad workers, not thieves. We have come only for our families. But if you seek a fight, you will find 1 inch." The threat hung in the cold air. Thorne, a bully at heart, was no match for 100 determined men protecting their own. He glared at Corbin, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over, Gunslinger. With that, he pulled his horse's reins and rode off, his group scattering behind him like leaves in the wind. A noticeable relief settled over the clearing. The confrontation was over. Mr. Chen turned to Corbin, his eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. "You saved them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my entire world." That evening, the small clearing around Corbin's cabin was transformed. The Chinese men set up a temporary camp, their fires dotting the snowy landscape. Mr. Chen invited Corbin to share their food, insisting he sit as their guest of honor. Through a man who acted as an interpreter, Corbin learned the full story. Their camp had indeed been raided by a band of outlaws, and in the ensuing panic and snowstorm, the triplets had been lost. Mr. Chen and his men had been searching relentlessly for days, following faint tracks and rumors until they were led here. As the moon rose high in the winter sky, Mr. Chen gathered his men. He explained that they had a tradition of honoring those who performed great deeds of courage and compassion. By saving the triplets, Corbin had earned their deepest respect. He then turned to Corbin, his voice carrying in the still, cold air. "We wish to honor you. You have saved the blood of our people. Our hearts are full of gratitude, and we will not let such an act go unrecognized." Corbin, a man who had long since forgotten what honor felt like, was speechless. Mr. Chen presented him with a small, beautifully carved jade pendant on a silk cord. "A symbol of protection and friendship," he explained. "You will forever be a friend to us." Then he spoke a name. Wei, the interpreter, leaned in. "It means guardian," he whispered. A murmur of agreement rose from the 100 men gathered around them. They bowed their heads in a silent, powerful display of respect. For the first time since he had lost his own family years ago, Corbin felt a sense of belonging, a warmth that had nothing to do with the roaring fires. At the break of day, the encampment was taken down with the same efficiency it had been erected. It was their time to depart, to journey northward and rejoin their primary group. Corbin stood by his small dwelling as Mr. Chen approached with the young girls. Lin, Mai, and Su, now dressed in warm, insulated clothing, each stepped forward and gave him a serious embrace, a gesture that caused a lump in his throat. "Will I encounter you again?" Corbin inquired, the words feeling unfamiliar on his tongue. Mr. Chen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Our journeys are distinct. However, you will forever be Wei. A protector. Perhaps fate will reunite us someday." He smiled, a genuine display of warmth and esteem. "Thank you." Corbin observed their departure, a long procession of figures disappearing into the snow-covered horizon. He remained there until they were out of sight, the quietness of the plains returning, but it felt altered now. It was no longer an empty quiet, but a tranquil one. He returned to his cabin, the jade pendant cool against his skin. The fire was diminishing, and the small drawings the girls had etched in the frost on the window were starting to melt. In the subsequent weeks, news of the event spread throughout Redemption Gulch. Thorn Standing was damaged, while Corbin became a figure of reluctant admiration. He was still the reserved gunslinger on the outskirts of town, but something within him had changed. The harsh isolation he had once sought had been filled with the memory of 3 young girls and the gratitude of their father. He had confronted a snowstorm, a law enforcement group, and the specters of his own past, and in doing so, had discovered a degree of tranquility. The gunslinger had transformed into a guardian, and in the midst of the harshest